During this program we're going to talk about quality control. But just before we do, I'd like to take a brief look at the areas that we specifically want to explore. And I'd like to mention that I'm really not going to be terribly interested in things like door handles falling off or interior trim coming loose or things like that, although I know they are areas which could be considered to be important because although they're trivial, they're annoying. Pardon me. Therefore, I am primarily concerned with those sort of mechanical quality control problems which are likely to cause difficulties in areas of safety or expense or substantial inconvenience by way of being very time consuming. Now, another point which is very important, we're beginning by doing a road test, a full road test, on this current model Ford Falcon. I'll describe the car in some detail later on. That doesn't necessarily mean, and I'm only mentioning this because the implication is sometimes wrongly accepted by people, it doesn't necessarily mean that I believe that Australian cars have lower standards of overall quality control than cars from other countries. I think it's important to note right here and now that only one country at this very moment seems to have a consistently high standard of quality control in all terms of automobile engineering, and that's Japan. Maybe not in design, but we're not talking about design, so don't get confused about that. We're talking about assembly, we're talking about machining, we're talking about castings, we're talking about the things that actually go up to make the motor car itself. In all other countries, that is, all of the European countries, and in Australia and in America, the standard of quality control around the world leaves something to be desired. And that's not just my opinion, that's the opinion of a great many consumer advocates right throughout the world. Okay, if we've established where we're going, let's begin by going there through a road test in a conventional Australian family car. Actually, I must begin by correcting myself. It's not truly a conventional family hack in that it has the 351 V8 engine and a 4-speed manual gearbox. And if you were going to buy the big V8, you'd probably buy it in automatic, and you may not buy the really big V8, you'd probably buy the 302 V8 anyway. But in every other sense, it's in Falcon Fairmont configuration and therefore very close to being the standard family hack, but with just a little better trim than you might get in, for example, the basic Falcon or the Falcon 500. And that brings up a fairly interesting point right from the outset, because the very first thing about this car that I found very impressive indeed was a really incredibly effective cockpit layout, and I think it's worth taking a look at. So we'll stop for a second and do that. Funny thing, in the whole history of talk, we've never ever actually done a complete road test on a Falcon of any sort. We did take a look at one once as part of a story on base models versus slightly upgrading the system generally. But we've never actually done a road test on a Falcon because there was not one that was released which was different enough to make it worthwhile. And this one does, without a doubt. This interior has evolved out of a number of potentially good Falcon interiors, all of which just missed out somewhere. But I can only find one area in which this total interior fails at all, and that is simply in that it doesn't provide quite enough rear legroom for tall passengers sitting in the back, and it's slightly restricted in the headroom area for the same people. But in every other sense, it's not only good, it's brilliant. It's really a fabulous interior design, and thank the Lord it's come out of an Australian car. Just let me give you an idea. From the driver's point of view, without a doubt, the best bucket seats in the business, but they have been for some time. In this case, cloth, not uncomfortable, certainly grabs the body well and holds it in place, doesn't get unnecessarily hot, doesn't make you unnecessarily sticky. A very long seat area which provides a good roll under the legs and good support right throughout in the lumbar region, in the back, at the top of the shoulders, fully adjustable fore and aft. One further adjustment, of course, could be a steering column because that might make it suit everybody, but for me, the driving position in this car is about perfect. And not only is it good in that sense, but the seat sits high enough to give you a really good line of vision across the bonnet to all points on the road ahead. That's terrific. I really like that. Then moving on from there, a very well instrumented panel with instruments easy to read, big readouts, clear, precise, no problems with those sort of things at all. I just can't help feeling that this, one further point, a steering wheel which at long last is the way steering wheels should always have been. The right size, not unnecessarily large and certainly not so small that you can't handle it at all, made of vinyl, reasonably soft, good grip, single bar across. Someone, at long last, has been thinking. This Fairmont has some very good points and some very bad points. The first bad point is the power steering, which isn't bad just because it's power steering, but I do wish that somebody at Ford, GM and Chrysler would one day perhaps take a drive in a Jaguar XJ6 or 12, or maybe the 3.0S BMW or something like that, which also has power steering, but which has power steering which is not excessively boosted and which still provides some feel and some feedback for the driver. And this sort of power steering doesn't do that. And there's one other feature about it which is specifically disagreeable. And that is that it is so light that it is quite possible for people to tend to oversteer corners. Even when you get used to it, you pull on more lock than you really need, especially with the variable ratio feature. So that in itself I don't particularly like. This engine is quite remarkable in its performance. It's worth mentioning that Ford have now dropped the GT version of their car in favour of this Fairmont GXL, and it doesn't have GT performance, but by heaven it doesn't go far off it. And this 351 cubic inch V8 gives more performance than anybody could ever need unless you were pulling a caravan 40 feet long or something ridiculous like that. It just isn't necessary, in my opinion, to have that sort of power, and although I can see reasons for V8s occasionally, the 302 would do the job just as adequately and probably a little more economically. I have to mention the brakes. They are four-wheel disc brakes, and they are almost spectacularly good for a car of this size. Really good brakes, really good brakes. That's what it's all about. Now the thing is, of course, I'm not saying for a moment that all Falcons have got four-wheel disc brakes. They haven't. It's only available as an option on this 351 engine car. It's rapidly becoming time for Ford to put it on all their cars because they are so good, and their cars deserve good brakes. In fact, not only deserve them, for heaven's sake, they just must have them. It's as simple as that. Ford's GXL Falcon is the, Fairmont in fact, is the top of the range as far as the Falcon body style is concerned. Beyond that you go to Fairlanes and LTDs and things. It sells at around about $8,500, and in fact it's very nearly a truly good car, which is a nice thing to be able to say about something that comes out of Australia. And at $8,500, considering the appointments, it's really pretty good value as well. One other disadvantage, apart from the ones we've already mentioned, is the fact that with this engine, on test, we managed to achieve only 10 miles to the gallon. Now, okay, that's unrealistic. It's very new. We drove it harder than most people would drive it, and therefore I guess it's probably fair to say that we might be able to expect 15 or 16 or thereabouts. It's not a lot, not by any standards, and it probably, in today's economic climate, isn't enough for most people. So it's worth considering if you're going to buy one. You'll need to have a fairly big pay packet just to feed it.